Despite 75th to 79th Streets being so dangerous and gang-infested that it's literally nicknamed Terror Town, the area, particularly 79th Street, has spawned some of the biggest Chicago rappers who avoided gangs. You may be surprised to find out that one of the most successful musicians and entrepreneurs of our generation, Kanye West, grew up in a childhood home only minutes away from Terror Town. And despite later in his career claiming to be affiliated with the Gangsta Disciples, Kanye actually had early lyrics where he discussed encountering black peace stones in the neighborhood and having to go by a nickname so they would leave him alone. And Kanye would even bring rap legend Jay-Z back to the area many years later. But when it comes to the most famous name in the rap game associated with the No Limit gang in Terror Town, we're of course talking about G Herbo, formerly known as Lil Herb. Herbo would meet fellow No Limit drill legend Lil Bibby at a local youth center after school. Together, Herbo and Bibby would spark a friendship, eventually becoming collaborators and putting their block on the map as far as drill music is concerned. Lil Bibby made big moves in the music industry through both the booth and the boardroom, eventually partnering up with his brother G Money and starting the record label Grade A Productions, playing a big role in bringing top-tier talent like Juice WRLD and the Kid Laroi to the forefront of music. But away from the music and back to the streets, another famous name you might associate with No Limit is Cairo, an outspoken affiliate who will play a major part in the beef as this story develops. And another name from the streets that you might know from the music is Mad Max, aka C Money or Killer Chris. He's possibly the most active killer in the street side of this story, becoming infamous in both the streets and on the internet for allegedly being a fearless shooter who claimed the lives of numerous enemies. Now, as far as the streets goes, there were allegedly two main leaders of No Limit back in the early days. Rumored to be a direct relative of Blackstone Rangers founder Eugene Bull Hairston, G Bull was from 78th Street, one of two commanding members of No Limit who apparently played a role in mentoring the likes of Lil Bibby, White Sean and G Money, with another gang leader by the name of G Gill, hailing from 79th Street, commanding another set of the younger generation of No Limit, mentoring the likes of G Mainsky, G Herbo, Jock, and Mad Max himself, who would post publicly on Instagram about coming up under G Gill. Other important names associated with the No Limit movement who you might hear mentioned in this story include Pharaoh, Lil Wet, aka Wet 'em Up, and Crazy James. There's quite literally dozens of people who claim No Limit publicly, with some estimates of its membership online suggesting that the gang is 200 people strong. It would be difficult to identify and name every member here, and that's really not something I'm trying to do right now. But that's a selection of some of the most important names who you'll be hearing about over the course of this story. The fact that No Limit is such a large gang is perhaps the reason that the crew was able to survive at such a long war with so many enemies. As in this story, there are three distinct feuds going on between No Limit and their allies and their enemies in different parts of the city. The three groups that No Limit and their allies are feuding with specifically include the Lakeside Gangsta Disciples, some of whom go by KTS or Kill to Survive, Pocket Town, another group of Gangsta Disciples, and Black Mob, a group descending from the original Black Peace Stones in the area. So let's start by taking a closer look at the Lakeside GDs, some of whom go by the terrifying nickname KTS or Kill to Survive. Lakeside are arguably No Limit's biggest opposition. They're a crew made up of Gangsta Disciples and Vice Lords in a particular area of Terror Town. South of Terror Town is No Limit territory, with an overlapping area in the southeast known as Lakeside, hence the intense rivalry between these two groups. In fact, the nearby McDonald's, located on 2425 East 79th Street, has been the scene of much bloodshed and drama in this feud, but we'll get to that later. Some from this area and the nearby Pocket Town go by the nickname KTS or Kill to Survive, sometimes referred to as Cutthroat. The terrifying implications of those nicknames alone should be enough to give you an idea of just how deadly this feud can get. In fact, some KTS members even sport a large shoot to kill crosshair tattoo on their necks, a terrifying prospect which likely inspired fear into pretty much anyone these guys encountered, gang member or not. In fact, KTS members had local residents so terrified that there's examples from back in 2010 with locals posting lists of gang members to avoid on Facebook and telling others that their area is under attack. Associated with this group, you've got the likes of KTS Dre and KTS Von, both feared hitters due to their family's gang ties, with their father Vinny apparently having a deep history of involvement in the local gangs. Vinny was apparently an OG gang member from the area who had clearly taught his sons the ways of the street from early. But in addition to being shooters, the likes of Von and Dre were also prolific posters on social media, being seen in numerous clips online, driving through rival territories armed and looking for a response. Another significant Lakeside member who will be important later character in this story is Posto, a local member who would sadly lose his life, with this incident representing yet another significant escalation in the war between these two areas. But before we get to that, there's actually another Lakeside member whose killing would represent one of the early triggers of this deadly war. That young man's name is Nutso, who was killed by another group close to No Limit in 2008. That group's name is the Muskegon Boys. The Muskegon Boys are a set of gangster disciples from Terrortown. Originally going by the Muskegon Block Gangsters, they hail from 78th and Muskegon Avenue, just off of Exchange. This set was apparently pioneered by two locals, going by the street names of Doski and Whitebread. In the past, they may have been considered closer to the fellow gangster disciples in Lakeside, but events would unfold, driving these two GD sets apart and the Muskegon Boys and No Limit much closer together, with the alliance between these two crews famously being NLMB, or the No Limit Muskegon Boys, sometimes referred to with the backronym Never Leave My Brothers. Many of the younger members of No Limit and the Muskegon Boys would form close friendships, with several individuals playing a significant role as part of this story. People like Zale, Rock, Kobe, and Fazo. As mentioned previously, the Muskegon Boys and Lakeside had formerly been on good terms due to their shared GD heritage, but that would all change around 2008, when younger members of the Muskegon Boys would get their hands on firearms, ultimately leading to deadly outcomes between the crews. Eventually, a beloved member from Lakeside by the name of Nutso would be shot and killed. Nutso, real name Larry Pickens, was murdered on his porch at 7815 South Marquette Avenue in June 2008. This represented an early escalation between the Muskegon Boys and Lakeside, with the Muskegon Boys eventually forming that NLMB alliance with No Limit. But from here, things would get much more complicated. As I mentioned earlier, No Limit would be battling two other gang sets in addition to their war with Lakeside. Playing a small part of this is a historical overlap between some members of Lakeside and Pocket Town. And to understand this, we've got to take a closer look at Pocket Town, another gang set who would battle No Limit fiercely for control of the streets of Chicago. Pocket Town is yet another gang with its heritage from the Black Pea Stones. This can be seen in graffiti all over the area depicting the 5-point star depicted in early Black Pea Stone folklore. This area apparently earned the name Pocket Town due to its triangular shape and is based towards the greater Grand Crossing area, a short drive west of Terrortown. Nearby Circon City is another older gang set with loose connections to No Limit. Gangs have been active in Pocket Town as far back as the 1980s. In fact, there's one kingpin from the area named Nate Hill, who became one of America's biggest drug traffickers, apparently forging close ties with the Black Pea Stones before eventually being taken down in a big bust. Now, according to comments on Reddit, the gangster disciples in Pocket Town in the 90s were somewhat organised, but fractures in the group throughout the 2000s would see individuals branching off, forming new alliances, and breaking free of the past as new feuds emerged between members from varying sets. For example, you've got the likes of Rio, hailing from Pocket Town, but also affiliated with KTS. One individual who played a role in early feuds related to Pocket Town goes by the name of Lil Pez, or Paris. He was murdered just age 16 in Grand Crossing in March 2008, being found with a gunshot wound to the head on the sidewalk of the 1300 block of East 72nd Street around 11 PM. His sister would tell the news that she'd feared her brother had fallen in with local gangs, with it being believed that Lil Pez had formed links with gang members in both Lakeside and Pocket Town, with it being believed that his killing marked a significant escalation in tension in the area. So by 2008, we have the likes of the Muskegon Boys and No Limit warring with the Lakeside GDs, or KTS, as well as former Pea Stones based in Pocket Town. But there's just one more piece to this complicated puzzle, because there's yet one more significant group famous for being constantly at war with No Limit, a set of gangsters based in the north of Terrortown, descending from the original Black Pea Stones, who go by the name of Black Mob. In the north of Terrortown, there's a territory controlled by a group called Black Mob. Based on 74th to 75th and Phillips, only a few blocks north of 79th where No Limit call home. One of the most famous and feared names from Black Mob is Shooter Shells. Much like Mad Max, Shooter Shells had allegedly played a role in numerous killings as part of this feud, apparently cultivating a fearsome reputation in the streets. But we'll learn more about him later in the story. Black Mob is a set branching off from the original Pea Stones, descending from Jeff Fort, who claimed Terrortown since the early 90s. It's said that over the years following the large busts on the original Pea Stone leadership that descended from Jeff Fort, Black Mob in the north would continue on the Pea Stone legacy, controlling the drug trade in the area. But as renegade Pea Stone sets like No Limit formed, for a period these newer sets would be expected to pay a tax to the original generation of Black Pea Stones, Black Mob in the north. Essentially, if these new younger No Limit gangsters wanted to sell drugs in Terrortown, they would have to pay the OGs from Black Mob, and as you can probably imagine, that is where tension started. It's said that at some point in the 90s, former leader of No Limit, G Bull, was killed, though there's very little information online about that particular incident. But what we do know is that into the noughties, a new leadership figure for the No Limit troops emerged, a man known as Hellrail aka G-Rail or Rue Gotti, not to be confused with another Hellrail from Lakeside, who we'll discuss later in this story. Up until this point, Black Mob and No Limit had been historically friendly, but soon a turf war would break out between these two factions. A No Limit member by the name of Vito had allegedly been selling drugs in Black Mob turf. He was ultimately attacked for not paying tax or showing respect to the elder P-Stones controlling that area. Retaliation from No Limit would soon follow, and story has it that Vito would attempt to shoot up an enemy from Black Mob, unsuccessfully attempting to kill them with their family present. And this reckless act of disrespect would apparently spark the bitter war between Black Mob and No Limit. Eventually, on the 27th of April 2009, Vito, real name Davis Johnson, would be murdered in the street in Terrortown. After apparently being confronted on the street about the disrespect, Vito was allegedly shot 5 times in front of a large crowd. Police were called to the scene of the shooting at around 1:20 in the morning, attending the 7800 block of South Essex, where they found Vito with gunshot wounds in his chest just a few blocks from his home, and he would sadly be pronounced dead by 2:18 AM. Vito's killer went by the name of Boo from Black Mob. Real name Trinity Walton, he was charged with the killing of Vito, ultimately getting 60 years in prison. The loss of Vito hit No Limit members hard, and surviving members would regularly bring him up in conversation and in songs. G Herbo would rap on his computer's freestyle that he drops the 5 for Vito, a reference to doing a downward 5-finger hand sign as a mark of disrespect to the 5-point star that represents the early Black P-Stone movement which Black Mob descended from. Dropping the 5s is essentially a P-Stone killer hand sign. Showing respect for their fallen brother Vito would echo through everything the No Limit members did and said for years to come. Even many years later, when Lil Bibby signed Juice WRLD, he became so indoctrinated into the gang's way of talking, he'd regularly be seen on camera swearing on Vito's life in regular conversation.
On Vito, this nigga good. On Vito, this nigga getting paid.
The killing of Vito caused No Limit members to identify as BMK or Black Mob killers. And considering the separate beef going on with the gangster disciples from Lakeside, many No Limit members would also identify with the GDK or GD killer movement. In addition to dropping the 5, many would be seen in pictures doing the upside down pitchfork hand sign commonly associated with the GDK movement. And once again, upon signing to Lil Bibby, you might catch pop singer Juice WRLD throwing up GDK in numerous pictures too. And since this meant that No Limit members were beefing both Black P-Stones and gangster disciples at the same time, many from No Limit would identify as EBK or Everybody Killers. Sadly, however, the murder of Vito was just the beginning of a long and bloody war between these groups. And in the decade plus that would follow, countless men from every corner and pocket of Terrortown would lose their lives to gun violence. And while not every killing in this story would be associated with these specific feuds, the sad truth is the young members growing up in Terrortown would be forced to witness death and destruction throughout their most formative years, no doubt having an incredibly detrimental effect on their mindsets and prospects for the future. The next tragedy would strike on July 2nd, 2009, when senior NLMB member James Robinson aka J-Mo or Prince Chico would be shot and killed around 10 PM near the 79th Street of Yates Avenue. He was found by police on the street with a bullet in his head. Prince Chico would be another of the names that would be sorely missed by the young members of No Limit. Just like Vito, G Herbo would go on to memorialize Chico in several of his songs, like the track East Side Story, where he would reminisce growing up around Vito, Hellrail, and Chico in the neighborhood. Fortunately, Herbo was one of the examples of a Terrortown native who was able to take what he witnessed in the streets and turn it into art. Sadly, many others wouldn't be so lucky. And to make matters worse, it wouldn't only be the ops that young men in Terrortown would have to fear, as many of the young teenagers in the area forced to carry weapons to defend themselves from potential rivals, hell-bent on shooting at them and taking their lives, as a result would unfortunately also face the prospect of the police shooting at them too.